It began with a quiet exchange behind the guarded doors of Kensington Palace, a conversation so tightly controlled that even senior aides were left in the dark. But when Catherine, Princess of Wales, emerged, her composed demeanor cracked just enough to reveal something deeper. This wasn't routine. This wasn't ceremonial. Something had shifted. And at the center of it all was a legacy no one was supposed to uncover. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded inside that room was not announced, not recorded, and certainly not meant to reach the public, but the silence that followed spoke louder than any statement ever could. Reports suggest that the meeting between Catherine and Princess Anne was not merely symbolic, but decisive, anchored around a sealed document long associated with Elizabeth II, a document that, according to palace whispers, had remained untouched for years, waiting for the exact moment when it could no longer be ignored. Those familiar with the internal workings of the monarchy have quietly hinted that this was no ordinary inheritance discussion. It was something far more deliberate, far more calculated. Catherine's expression as she exited, measured yet visibly shaken, became the first undeniable signal that the conversation had carried emotional weight far beyond expectation. Insiders whisper that aides were instructed, with unusual urgency, to maintain absolute silence, an order that only fueled speculation rather than containing it, because silence, in a place built on tradition and visibility, rarely means nothing. It often means everything. And then came the subtle shifts. A delay in scheduled appearances, a quiet recalibration of priorities. Observers noted that Catherine, while maintaining her public composure, carried an intensity that had not been there before, as though she had stepped into a reality that demanded more than preparation, it demanded acceptance. At the same time, palace administrative streams, ranging from internal briefings to off-record conversations, began referencing what some described as an inheritance realignment, a phrase so carefully chosen that it revealed just enough to raise questions, but never enough to answer them. And yet, those closest to the situation insist that this wasn't about jewels in the conventional sense. It wasn't about wealth, nor prestige, nor even symbolism alone. It was about continuity, about ensuring that what had been built over generations would not simply be passed down, but protected, preserved, and, if necessary, redefined. Because if the monarchy stands for anything, it is not just survival, it is evolution under pressure. And now, with this quiet revelation beginning to ripple outward, the weight of that responsibility appears to be shifting, settling onto Catherine in a way that feels both intentional and unavoidable. But what Catherine had just learned wasn't merely about inheritance, it was the unveiling of a hidden royal intention that could redefine the future of the crown itself. Long before the world began speculating, Elizabeth II had already set her plans in motion quietly, precisely, and far from public view. Hidden within layers of protocol and protected by decades of tradition, a blueprint existed, one that insiders now believe was never meant to be found this soon. But now that it has surfaced, its implications are impossible to ignore. What began as a whisper in the previous moments now deepens into something far more calculated, as if the events unfolding today were never sudden at all, but the result of decisions made long ago, carefully sealed and deliberately delayed. Reports suggest that at the heart of this revelation lies a confidential directive, one not publicly recorded, yet deeply embedded within the institutional framework surrounding the royal jewels, not merely items of adornment, but assets bound to identity, legacy, and continuity. Various interpretations of this directive point toward the involvement of the Royal Collection Trust, an entity traditionally tasked with preservation rather than allocation, yet now quietly linked to a process that feels far more selective than ceremonial. And that distinction changes everything. Because if the trust was indeed part of this mechanism, then what is unfolding is not accidental, it is structured, intentional, designed. Those familiar with palace administrative structures whisper that the timing of this directive was no coincidence. It is believed to have been finalized in the final chapter of the Queen's reign, during a period when her decisions carried not just authority, but urgency, a moment when foresight mattered more than appearance. And in that moment she appears to have chosen a path that defied expectation, not one based purely on hierarchy, but one rooted in lineage, stability, and long-term preservation. This is where the narrative begins to shift. Because inheritance within the monarchy has always followed a visible order, a structure understood both inside and outside palace walls. But this blueprint, if interpreted correctly, suggests something different. A deviation, a recalibration, a quiet acknowledgement that tradition alone may not be enough to secure the future. And at the center of this recalibration stands Princess Anne, not as a figurehead, but as an enforcer. Insiders claim that Anne's role was not simply ceremonial oversight, but guardianship of the directive itself, a responsibility that required precision, discretion, and above all, loyalty to the Queen's original intent. Known for her unwavering commitment to duty, Anne was never likely to question the directive only to protect it. And that protection, it seems, is now being activated, quietly, firmly, without spectacle, but not without consequence. Because as this blueprint begins to take shape in the present, it is also beginning to create fractures beneath the surface. Early signs of resistance have already been noted, subtle yet unmistakable. Different interpretations of internal conversations describe unease among certain royal factions' concerns, not openly voiced, but quietly understood. Because what this directive represents is not just preservation of history, but redistribution of significance. And in an institution where position defines power, even the smallest shift can feel like a seismic change. This is where the tension intensifies. Because while the blueprint itself may have been designed to protect the monarchy, its execution inevitably challenges those who believed the future was already written. It raises questions that cannot be easily answered. Why now? Why reveal this at a moment when stability is already under scrutiny? And perhaps most importantly, who stands to gain and who stands to lose? The answers remain just out of reach, obscured by protocol and protected by silence. But the pattern is becoming harder to ignore. What once appeared as isolated decisions now aligns with a larger design, one that suggests foresight rather than reaction. And as the pieces begin to connect, the narrative grows heavier, more complex, more unavoidable. Because this is no longer about speculation, it is about interpretation. It is about understanding a decision that was never meant to be explained, only executed. And as the details of this hidden blueprint began to emerge, it became clear this wasn't just about preserving history, it was about choosing who would carry it forward. These were never just jewels. They were symbols of power, continuity, and silent authority, pieces worn by queens who defined eras. And now, reports suggest that some of the most legendary pieces may have already been earmarked for Catherine, Princess of Wales, not through ceremony, not through tradition, but through something far more deliberate and far more controversial. Because within the monarchy, jewels do not simply decorate, they declare. They signal legitimacy without words, authority without announcement, and succession without debate. And as the hidden blueprint begins to take shape, those symbols are no longer sitting quietly in vaults or behind glass. They are being repositioned, reassigned, and, according to insiders, quietly aligned with a future that was never meant to arrive this soon. For generations, the most iconic pieces of the royal collection have carried stories that stretch far beyond their physical form. They have passed from queen to queen, each transition reinforcing a narrative of continuity, an unbroken line of power that feels almost untouchable. Various interpretations of palace records suggest that certain pieces were historically reserved, not just for rank, but for role, meaning they were meant to appear only at moments when the crown itself needed to be symbolized, protected, or reaffirmed. That is what makes the current whispers so unsettling. Because if those same pieces are now being quietly associated with Catherine ahead of expectation, then something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface. Something intentional, something irreversible. Those familiar with the inner workings of the royal collection suggest that this is not a spontaneous decision, but rather an extension of the directive tied to Elizabeth II, a continuation of the blueprint that is now beginning to reveal its true scale. It is not simply about ownership, it is about positioning, about ensuring that when the moment arrives, the transition does not feel sudden, but inevitable. And yet, that very inevitability is what has begun to unsettle certain corners of the institution. Because tradition, for all its strength, depends on predictability. It depends on order. And when that order appears to shift even slightly, it creates tension that cannot easily be contained. Reports suggest that some senior royal figures have privately expressed unease, not in open opposition, but in quiet reflection. because the early allocation of such significant pieces represents a break from long-standing expectations. It suggests that decisions are being made ahead of their time, guided not by immediate necessity, but by long-term vision. And while that vision may be rooted in preservation, its execution inevitably alters the balance of influence within the monarchy. Those who once assumed their place in the sequence now find themselves questioning whether that sequence still holds, whether the future they anticipated is still intact, and that uncertainty carries weight. It lingers. It reshapes conversations that never leave closed rooms. But beyond the tension, beyond the quiet resistance, there is a deeper meaning beginning to emerge. Because to be chosen in this way to be aligned with symbols that define eras is not simply an honor. It is a burden, a signal that the responsibility of continuity is no longer distant, but immediate. That preparation is no longer theoretical, but active. And for Catherine, that shift appears to be happening in real time, whether publicly acknowledged or not. The contrast is striking. On one side, the quiet strength of a figure stepping into alignment with legacy. On the other, the silent discomfort of those watching that alignment unfold earlier than expected. And in between, the undeniable sense that something fundamental is changing. Not loudly, not visibly, but decisively. Because if the jewels themselves are moving, then the future they represent is moving with them. But if the jewels themselves were powerful, the crown they pointed toward carried even greater consequences, one that could not be ignored. When the silence broke, it wasn't chaos that followed, it was precision. And at the center of that precision stood Princess Anne. Known for her unwavering loyalty to duty, Anne didn't hesitate. She moved swiftly, decisively activating protocols that few even knew existed. This wasn't just oversight. This was enforcement. What had once been whispers, scattered and uncertain, now began to take form under her control, as though the entire situation had been waiting for a single figure willing to act without hesitation. Reports suggest that Anne's role was never simply ceremonial, never confined to appearances or quiet support. Instead, she has long been regarded by those within palace circles as a guardian of continuity. Someone who understands that tradition is not preserved through sentiment, but through action measured, deliberate, and, when necessary, uncompromising. And now, that understanding was no longer theoretical. It was being applied. Insiders whisper that the first step was not public, not visible, but deeply procedural. An internal review described in some interpretations as a protocol alignment was quietly initiated, touching areas of the institution that rarely come under scrutiny. Not a disruption, but a recalibration, a methodical examination of roles, expectations, and responsibilities, all anchored to the directive believed to have originated from Elizabeth II. And within that recalibration, one truth began to emerge with unmistakable clarity. The blueprint was not optional, it was binding. Those familiar with the monarchy's internal structure understand what that means. It means that once activated, such directives are not debated, they are implemented. Carefully, strategically, without unnecessary noise. At the same time, Anne's movements were not isolated. They aligned almost seamlessly with the positioning of William, Prince of Wales, creating what some observers have described as a quiet but powerful axis within the institution. Not a declaration of authority, but a consolidation of it. Together, they represented stability and unspoken agreement that the future must be protected, even if that protection required difficult decisions in the present. And at the center of that alignment stood Catherine, Princess of Wales, not as a passive figure, but as the focal point around which these decisions were beginning to revolve. Reports suggest that this was no coincidence, that her positioning was not reactive, but intentional, supported by actions that, while subtle, carried undeniable weight. But precision often reveals what silence conceals. And as Anne's enforcement began to take effect, it also began to expose resistance, quiet, measured, but present. Different interpretations of internal discussions suggest that not all factions within the palace were comfortable with the pace or direction of these changes, because what was being reinforced was not just a directive, but a shift in influence. A redefinition of who holds weight within the institution and how that weight is exercised. For some, this shift may have felt necessary, even overdue. For others, it raised questions that could not easily be dismissed. Questions about timing, about intention, about what comes next. And yet, despite the undercurrent of tension, Anne's approach remained unchanged, steady, controlled, focused entirely on the reinforcement of the Queen's original intent, because in her view, and in the view of those aligned with her, this was never about preference. It was about preservation, about ensuring that the monarchy does not drift, does not weaken, does not lose the clarity that has defined it for generations. And that clarity, once established, must be protected at all costs, even if that protection creates discomfort, even if it forces confrontation, even if it reshapes relationships that once seemed fixed. Because in moments like this, the institution does not adapt slowly, it moves with purpose. And as that purpose becomes more visible, so too does the divide it creates. But as Anne tightened control behind the scenes, not everyone was willing to accept what this shift truly meant. Behind the polished image of unity, something far more fragile was unfolding. Not open rebellion, but resistance. Subtle, strategic, and deeply personal. Because for some within the palace, this wasn't just a shift in tradition, it was a loss of influence, of access, of future power. What had begun as quiet alignment behind closed doors was now revealing a deeper tension, one that could not be publicly acknowledged, yet could not be ignored either. Reports suggest that the interpretation of Elizabeth II's directive was far from unanimous. While some viewed it as a necessary step to protect continuity, others questioned whether its execution was stretching beyond what had ever been intended. And in an institution where interpretation can shape reality, those differences were not minor, they were foundational. Insiders whisper that concerns began to surface around the idea of bypassing traditional hierarchy, a concept that for generations had served as the backbone of royal succession and stability. Because if decisions were now being guided by a more selective framework, one that prioritized alignment over position, then the entire structure risked being quietly redefined. And that redefinition carried consequences, not immediate, not visible, but deeply felt by those who had long operated under a different understanding of how the future would unfold. For some, it was not just a question of protocol, it was a question of relevance. Where they stood, where they would stand next, and whether that place was now shifting beneath them. At the center of this tension, attention inevitably turned toward Queen Camilla, whose position within the monarchy had always been shaped by both acceptance and scrutiny. Different interpretations of internal discussions suggest that this evolving situation placed her in a uniquely complex position, not directly challenged, but undeniably affected. Because if the focus of long-term continuity was being redirected, then the balance of influence surrounding her role could not remain untouched. It was not confrontation. It was something quieter, more calculated, a gradual repositioning that did not need to be announced to be understood. And in that silence, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier. Meanwhile, Charles III remained, by most accounts, strategically silent, not disengaged, but measured, observing rather than intervening. Those familiar with palace dynamics suggest that this silence was not accidental, it was deliberate, allowing the process to unfold without adding further complexity to an already delicate situation. But silence, especially at that level, carries its own message. It leaves space for interpretation, for speculation, for assumptions that may or may not reflect reality. And within that space, tension tends to expand rather than resolve. Because when leadership does not openly define direction, others begin to question where that direction truly lies. For palace staff, the situation became even more intricate. Reports indicate that those working within the institution found themselves navigating a landscape of divided loyalties, where clarity was replaced by careful observation. Every instruction carried weight, every silence carried meaning, and in such an environment, even the smallest decisions required caution. Because alignment was no longer just about duty, it was about understanding where the institution was heading, and ensuring that one's role remained secure within that movement. And as these internal dynamics continued to evolve, the outside world began to take notice. Media speculation, once fragmented, started to converge around a single narrative, that something significant was unfolding behind the scenes. Not a scandal, not a crisis, but a shift, quiet, controlled, yet impossible to fully conceal. And as those whispers grew louder, so too did the pressure on the institution to maintain its image of unity, even as that unity was being quietly tested from within. And as tensions quietly escalated, One question lingered: was this truly about honoring the Queen or reshaping the monarchy in ways no one expected? The crown is not just worn, it is prepared for. And in ways few fully understood, that preparation may have already begun, not publicly, not ceremoniously, but through subtle shifts, quiet endorsements, and decisions that now appear anything but accidental. What once seemed like routine appearances, carefully scheduled engagements, and measured public moments now carry a different weight when viewed through the lens of everything that has quietly unfolded. Because preparation at this level is never announced, it is revealed slowly, almost invisibly, until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. And for Catherine, Princess of Wales, that pattern is beginning to take shape with a clarity that feels both deliberate and inevitable. Reports suggest that her increasing visibility in senior royal roles is not simply a matter of timing, but of positioning. Not sudden, not reactive, but carefully constructed over time. Each appearance, each responsibility, each moment of representation appears to align with a broader narrative, one that emphasizes stability, composure, and continuity. Those familiar with royal structures note that such visibility is rarely accidental. It is assigned, it is calibrated. It reflects an understanding within the institution of where focus must shift in order to secure what comes next. And that shift, while subtle on the surface, carries profound implications beneath it, because visibility is not just about presence, it is about preparation in plain sight. At the same time, the nature of these appearances has begun to change. Various interpretations suggest that they are no longer confined to supportive roles, but increasingly reflect leadership, authority, and long-term representation. Strategic placements at key events, moments of prominence that draw attention without demanding it, and an unmistakable sense of composure under scrutiny, all of it contributes to a growing perception that something is being reinforced, not loudly, not explicitly, but consistently. And consistency within the monarchy is often the clearest signal of intent, because what is repeated becomes expected, and what is expected eventually becomes accepted. This is where the alignment with William, Prince of Wales, becomes even more significant. Together, their presence reflects not just partnership, but direction, a shared positioning that suggests continuity rather than transition. Reports indicate that this alignment has been carefully maintained, ensuring that the image of future leadership is not fragmented, but unified, strong, stable, predictable in a way that reassures rather than unsettles. And in a time where internal tensions have quietly surfaced, that sense of unity becomes even more important. Because the monarchy does not simply project strength, it relies on it, especially when uncertainty begins to circulate beneath the surface. Meanwhile, symbolic gestures, small but meaningful, have not gone unnoticed. Insiders whisper that certain moments, once dismissed as ceremonial routine, now carry deeper significance when viewed alongside the emerging narrative. A choice of presence, a moment of prominence, a subtle shift in emphasis. None of it overwhelming on its own, but together forming a pattern that is difficult to dismiss. Because symbolism within the monarchy has always functioned as a language of its own, one that communicates without explanation and reveals without declaration. And now, that language appears to be speaking more clearly than ever before. As this pattern continues to unfold, public perception has begun to shift in response. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, like a realization forming over time. What was once seen as preparation for a distant future now feels immediate, present, already in motion. And that realization carries its own emotional weight, both inside and outside the institution. Because with it comes the understanding that the future is no longer theoretical, it is being shaped in real time. And that shaping, once begun, rarely reverses itself. But the deeper truth wasn't just about what was happening in public, it was about what had already been decided long before anyone noticed. If the whispers are true, then this wasn't a sudden decision, it was a legacy choice. One made with foresight, precision, and a deep understanding of what the monarchy would need to survive. And now that choice is no longer hidden. It's unfolding in real time. What once appeared as a series of disconnected moments, quiet meetings, subtle repositioning, unspoken alignment now converges into something far more cohesive, as if every step had been guided by a vision that extended well beyond the present. Reports suggest that the long-term intentions of Elizabeth II were never limited to preserving tradition alone, but to safeguarding the institution against the very pressures that now surround it. pressures of change, of expectation, of relevance in a world that no longer accepts permanence without purpose. And within that vision, the role of Catherine, Princess of Wales, begins to take on a meaning that feels less coincidental and more inevitable. Insiders whisper that Catherine's positioning was not merely about readiness, but about stability, about placing a figure at the center of the monarchy who could absorb tension without amplifying it, who could carry responsibility without appearing to seek it. In a time where internal uncertainty has quietly surfaced and external scrutiny continues to grow, that kind of presence becomes invaluable, because stability is not created through declaration set, is built through consistency, through trust, through the quiet reinforcement of values that feel unshaken even when everything around them begins to shift. And in that sense, Catherine represents more than preparation. She represents continuity in its most controlled form. But continuity alone does not explain the depth of what is unfolding. Various interpretations suggest that this legacy choice was also designed to bypass potential conflicts before they could emerge, conflicts rooted in ambiguity, in competing expectations, in the unpredictable nature of succession when left too open to interpretation. By quietly establishing direction early, the blueprint appears to remove uncertainty from the equation, replacing it with clarity that does not need to be publicly defended because it is internally secured. And that clarity, once embedded, reshapes the path forward without the need for confrontation. It does not eliminate tension, but it redirects it, containing it within boundaries that can be managed rather than allowed to expand. This is where the emotional weight becomes undeniable, because to carry such a legacy is not simply to inherit a role, it is to inherit responsibility at a scale that cannot be measured publicly. Reports indicate that those closest to the situation understand this burden, even if it is never openly discussed. The expectations are not temporary, they are enduring, and they require a level of discipline, resilience, and acceptance that few outside the institution can fully comprehend. For Catherine, this means stepping into a position that is both empowering and restrictive, defined not by personal ambition but by obligation to something far greater than herself, and that contrast the strength required to uphold duty while sacrificing personal freedom creates a tension that defines the very essence of monarchy itself. At the same time, the institution is adapting, whether it chooses to acknowledge it or not. The monarchy has always evolved, but rarely has that evolution felt so deliberate, so calculated, so quietly executed. Because in today's world, survival is not guaranteed by tradition alone. It requires alignment with expectation, responsiveness to change, and above all, a figure capable of embodying both the past and the future without allowing either to dominate. And in this unfolding narrative, that figure appears to have been chosen long before the world realized it was necessary. The pieces, once scattered, are now aligning with increasing clarity. The pattern, once hidden, is now visible. And the weight of that realization is beginning to settle, both within the palace and beyond it. And as the final pieces begin to fall into place, the question is no longer whether this was intentional, but whether it was inevitable. The future of the crown was never meant to be predictable. But now, as hidden decisions surface and long-guarded intentions come to light, one thing is becoming undeniable: this was always part of a much larger plan. A plan designed not just to preserve the monarchy, but to redefine it. What once felt like isolated developments, quiet meetings, symbolic gestures, carefully measured appearances now reveal themselves as pieces of a single, unfolding design. And at the center of that design stands Catherine, Princess of Wales, no longer positioned as a figure preparing for a distant future, but as someone already stepping into it. Reports suggest that her role is no longer forming, it is solidifying. Not announced, not declared, but understood through a series of deliberate signals that, when viewed together, create a narrative too consistent to dismiss. The long-term impact of the directive associated with Elizabeth II now begins to reveal its true significance. What once appeared as a protective measure for continuity now reads as something far more strategic: a framework, designed to guide the monarchy through a period of uncertainty without allowing that uncertainty to define it. Because preservation, in this context, does not mean resisting change, it means controlling it, shaping it, ensuring that evolution happens on the institution's terms, rather than in response to external pressure. And within that framework, every decision, every alignment, every quiet shift carries weight far beyond the moment in which it occurs. It contributes to a structure that is both resilient and adaptable, capable of maintaining its identity while adjusting to the demands of a changing world. This is where the strength of calculated decisions becomes most visible, because what has unfolded is not reactive, it is intentional. Reports indicate that each move has been designed to reinforce stability, to close gaps before they widen, and to establish clarity where ambiguity once existed. And in doing so, the monarchy strengthens itself not through force, but through precision, through the careful placement of responsibility, the measured distribution of influence, and the unwavering commitment to a vision that prioritizes longevity over immediacy. But with that strength comes attention. Public intrigue has intensified, not because of what has been openly stated, but because of what has been quietly implied. Observers across the world are beginning to connect the same patterns, to ask the same questions, to recognize that something significant is taking shape behind the scenes. And that recognition brings its own kind of pressure, one that demands consistency, clarity, and above all, confidence in the direction being taken. Yet, even as that attention grows, the balance between tradition and evolution remains at the heart of everything. Because the monarchy cannot survive by abandoning its past, nor can it endure by ignoring the future. It must exist between the two, drawing strength from both while allowing neither to dominate. And that balance is not easy to maintain. It requires decisions that may not always be understood in the moment, actions that may feel controversial before they feel necessary, and a willingness to accept that stability often comes at the cost of simplicity. For Catherine, this means carrying not just expectation, but transformation, becoming a figure who embodies both continuity and change without allowing either to overshadow the other. In the end, what is unfolding is not just a transition of roles, but a redefinition of purpose, a reminder that the monarchy, for all its tradition, is not static. It is shaped by those who lead it, protected by those who believe in it, and ultimately sustained by the choices made in moments like these, moments where the future is not left to chance, but carefully guided into place. And as the narrative reaches this point, the contrast becomes clear between what was expected and what is now emerging, between the comfort of tradition and the necessity of evolution, between the weight of legacy and the responsibility of carrying it forward. Because in the end, the crown doesn't simply pass, it is chosen, protected, and shaped by those willing to carry its weight into the unknown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.